first of all, who the most dangerous people are with guns. It's the government. It's the government. The government and its police force. As an op-ed by John Whitehead said, it's often the case that police shootings, incidents where law enforcement officers pull the trigger on civilians are left out of the conversation on gun violence. But a police officer shooting a civilian counts as gun violence. Every time an officer uses a gun against an innocent or an unarmed person, it contributes to the culture of gun violence in a country. And when you look at the statistics, now these are coming from the Washington Post, understand? But let's just take a look at them. We talk about this and what's behind it. If you're an unarmed black man, you're 4 times more likely to be killed by police than an unarmed white man. Most people killed by police are young men. In 2015, police have shot and killed an average of 3 people a day. More than 2,500 police departments have shot and killed at least one person since 2015. And the vast majority of people shot and killed by police are armed. But their weapons range from guns to knives to toy guns. Toy guns. You've got SWAT teams. You've got militarized police. Should you be concerned about any of this stuff? You know, we have the 2 different ways you can play these statistics. You know, you can say that, well, look, you've got more black people killed than white people, but, you know, that doesn't reflect necessarily what they are doing. You know, just because the police shoot somebody that is armed, if they're armed with a gun, the police have the duty to protect other people. It's not that clear cut when we look at these kind of statistics, but it is important to understand, as Matt Agorist of Free Thought Project points out, mass shootings have claimed the lives of 339 people since 2015. During the same period of time, police have claimed the lives of 4,355 citizens. So understand, when we talk about guns being out of control, and they've got to be taken away from individual citizens, including criminals, including gun violence from gang members and people who are, you know, part of the organizations that have arisen in response to the prohibition of drugs. Yeah, that's what we saw yesterday in that shooting in Philadelphia. When we look at that, 1,200% more people killed by the police than by mass shooters since 2015. Folks, if you haven't been supporting us, please consider supporting us. We do thank those people who have supported us, especially over the last year. We do have some of our most popular products are almost out of stock after the extended sale, but we do have Ultimate Krill Oil back in stock, 50% off. Many other products, 50% off at InfoWarsStore.com. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back. You know, I was just talking about the statistics put out by the Washington Post about police shootings and so forth, and they put that out to promote a racist narrative. And again, whether there is racism behind it or not, these same people have cried racism so many times that even when there is real racism, nobody pays any attention anymore. It's like crying wolf. Nevertheless, when we look at the way the police have been militarized, the SWAT teams and so forth, remember the shooting that was outside, I think it was Albuquerque, New Mexico, the homeless man up in the hills, that video, that body camera footage surfaced, and people saw the guy essentially executed for no reason. He wasn't a threat to the police. They just got tired of dealing with him. And not long after that, a guy who had been an instructor at the police academy there, the state police academy, said they're teaching a shoot-first curriculum. All you have to do is assert that you feel like you're threatened and you're entitled and protected legally if you want to shoot and kill somebody. Take away a threat. He says, I refuse to teach that curriculum. And that is a curriculum that's being pushed out of Washington into the local areas. Things have changed. Frank Serpico has also spoken out criticizing the propensity of police as part of their training to shoot first, to shoot whenever they feel that they're concerned. And of course, the police are not trained to deal with emergencies in any other way other than with a gun. You've got a lot of police officers who are not fit, a lot of men and women who are very, very unfit, who don't have the ability to peacefully subdue somebody. Remember the incident on the New York subway a couple of years ago? And it was a group of guys who are police officers from Scandinavia. They were in their 30s, and they were traveling, and then there was violence on the subway. They had a person that was armed. They're just dressed as tourists. They just look like ordinary tourists. But they took care of the incident. They took the guy down. They disarmed him, and they subdued him. They sat on him, kept him tied up in knots, essentially, until the police got there, and then they handed him over. Why? Because they were fit, because they were trained to do that, rather than just pull out a gun and kill the guy. They didn't have a gun with them. And that's the way it used to be for the police. That's what Frank Serpico talks about. And so during this last 4 years, since 2015, 339 people have been killed by non-police, shot with mass shootings. So these are the mass shooting events. This is not the drive-by shootings that are being fueled by the war on drugs or the kind of incident that we saw where all the police were shot yesterday in Philadelphia. We'll talk about that in a moment. Fueled by the war on drugs. No, these are the mass shootings that are done by individuals who are nuts. 339 people killed since 2015. And yet, during that same period of time, police have shot 4,355 people. 12 times more people than have been taken out by mass shooters. But we have to take away the guns of innocent, law-abiding gun owners because of 339 deaths from a mass shooting. And that is nothing compared to what happens in just one city, Chicago, where they have all of these gun control laws. Every weekend, you have more people killed in Chicago, and they don't ever cover it, do they? Than any of these other incidents. That is being driven, like the shooting in Philadelphia, by the war on drugs, by that prohibition. But just take a look at the headlines from Free Thought Project. SWAT raids, innocent family, shoots 12-year-old boy in bed, covers up the body camera information. There's a lawsuit about that. Cops still not charged after dumping 26 rounds into a truck full of small children, shooting 3 of them in Oklahoma City. This was a situation where the police officer said that the robbery suspect was in a car with his family, and they said he sped up and he tried to come after us, so we shot and killed him. Well, the car was stationary when all the shooting was done, and they could have stepped out of the way. It's kind of like these police who will pursue somebody. They've now learned to hang back, but not shoot at people. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back. Let's talk a little bit about guns. Of course, we had the live event that unfolded for quite a period of time yesterday in Philadelphia. That's being used by Democrats. Predictably, Kamala Harris shows the need for gun control. We're going to talk about what that really shows. And it's not an argument for gun prohibition. It's actually an argument against drug prohibition. But we'll talk about that in a moment. As I was saying at the top of the hour, we have police have killed 12 times as many people since 2015 as have been killed in mass shooting events. And that's not including the violence of drug prohibition. That's just the mass shooters. But 12 times more from police because of the incident. Like I was just saying, you had kids, one of them shot in the head, a family in a car, robbery suspect. The police see him, and they say that he tried to drive away. Whether that is true or not, the car was stationary at the point where the people were shot. And they could have stood back, gotten out of the way. They could have pursued the guys you typically see now. They typically don't have high-speed pursuits. They typically will follow somebody who's running from the police because they don't want to get innocent people killed. They will pull back with their vehicles, but there's no pullback in terms of gun violence from the police. Do you want the government to be the only ones to have guns? Take a look at this story, also from Free Thought Project. They pretty much cover police that are out of control, trying to get some kind of control over the police department. Look, we need police, but we need them to act differently. There needs to be some oversight and some control of the police, a different kind of training, different priorities for the police. It's important to report this, but for reporting this, they get banned by social media. Do you think this is being done because the people in Silicon Valley, at Google, Twitter, Facebook, you think those people love law enforcement? No, they don't. No, they're inciting people to attack ICE offices and so forth. They don't like law enforcement at all. But they do what the government tells them to do. And so here's one more story. Cop threatens innocent pregnant woman and her fiance with a shotgun simply for filming them. This was in Memphis, Tennessee. The man filming immediately asks why they have a gun pointed in his direction. And the cop says, so we don't get shot. The man uploads the video. He responds to the statement of the militarized police force that he was the one who brought the man being placed under arrest to the door. While he had the shotgun aimed directly at him, he continues to plead, please put the guns down. After his requests go unheeded, he points out that his fiancée, who is standing next to him, is also pregnant. And then they keep the gun pointed on him even after the other guy is taken away in handcuffs. They keep the gun pointed on him. He's not armed. The guy is ordering him around, but he's afraid to move at that point, right? That's the situation that people get in. Is he going to shoot me because I'm moving? Is he going to shoot me because I don't move? What do I do? This guy's not acting in a reasonable way. It is assault, isn't it, with a deadly weapon, point a shotgun at somebody like that when they're not a threat to you. And as TomDispatch.com points out, in war and weapons, we trust in America. Not in God we trust, but we trust in war. And we trust in the military. Militarization has become America's national religion. It's not in God we trust in our military. Everything is put into the NDAA, no matter how absurd or unrelated it is. No matter how egregious a violation of the Constitution or our individual liberties, they can stick it into the NDAA and it'll get passed. Now, national defense is a legitimate function of the federal government. It's one of the very few functions that the federal government has that is legitimate. And of course, they refuse to defend the nation at our own borders. They use the cover of national defense to get us involved in one foreign war after the other perpetually. We have 7 or 8 of them going right now. And they're probably going to continue through the entire presidency of President Trump, just like they did through the entire presidency of Obama. And almost went through the entire presidency of George Bush. As he points out, as attitudes towards war grow dangerously worshipful in the U.S., quitting our endless wars becomes all the more difficult. And it becomes even more difficult to criticize anybody who is a respected military veteran, like Congressman Dan Crenshaw, when he comes out and says that he supports red flag gun laws. Don't criticize him. He's a hero. Well, I believe he is a hero. Most likely. I don't have any reason to believe that he's not a hero. I don't know the specifics about his service, but I have no reason to believe that Dan Crenshaw is not a hero. But he is not a hero to me if he's going to attack the Constitution. That makes you an anti-hero. That says that you've gone over to the dark side, Dan Crenshaw, if you're going to do that. Let me tell you something. You want to defend somebody because they were in the military? Defend the people who are going to be in the crosshairs primarily, and that's going to be veterans when they enact these red flag gun laws. All they have to do is point a finger at a veteran and say he's suffering from PTSD. Boom. Kill him. Take his gun. If he resists, kill him. He's coming after his own people when he does this. Now, what he says is, he says, clearly, when we said red flag laws, you guys stopped listening. That's right. I absolutely do. And I'll tell you why in just a moment here. I stopped listening, Dan, when you said red flag gun laws, and I'm going to lay out the reasons for that coming up here. I do stop listening. But he says, you can't hear what we're suggesting because understandably, you automatically assume that we're just agreeing with the left's version of that law. See, it's not a problem. This is coming from Republicans. Republicans would never stab us in the back, would they? No, they would never do that. They'd never violate the Constitution. They'd never violate our due process. No, Republicans would never do that. He says, the difference is the left is putting out blatantly unconstitutional laws. Theirs are just subtly unconstitutional, I guess. He says it all boils down to how due process is protected. And I said all boils down to a bunch of BS being fed to you by somebody. Lindsey Graham defending red flag gun laws. As Reason Magazine talks about it, Lindsey Graham said there's plenty of judicial proceedings every day in America where somebody is adjudged to be a danger to themselves and others, and they're put in a mental health facility. That's what Lindsey Graham said. He didn't mention, says Reason Magazine, that the standards for involuntary psychiatric treatment are notably stricter than the standards for taking away people's guns under red flag laws. And he also didn't mention, and neither did Reason, I'll tell you, when you commit somebody because they're violent and dangerous, when you do that and you have a stricter standard of doing that, you are taking the dangerous person and putting them somewhere so they won't harm somebody. With the red flag gun laws, the standard is lower. and you're not concerned about what that person's going to do with a brick, with a knife, with a car. You know, the guy that shot people up, he said, brick, what was it? Brick, knife, gun, I think is what he said. But yeah, you can kill people with any of those things, right? You add car to that. You got to add bomb to that. You got to add a baseball bat to that. A ball-peen hammer to that. If the person is a dangerous person, if they're crazy, that's what you put away. And you do it with due process. This isn't about protecting the public from a dangerous person because they would have that person committed. This is simply about gun confiscation. Let's call red flag laws what they are. It's nothing but gun confiscation. It's a beard for it. Under Florida's Baker Act, which is how they put dangerous people away, commit them. Reason Magazine points out the state has to show by clear and convincing evidence a substantial likelihood that a candidate for commitment because of mental illness will, in the near future, inflict serious bodily harm or on himself or others as evidenced by recent behavior causing, attempting, or threatening such harm. Okay? So, mental illness, something's going to happen in the near future, and a substantial likelihood. It has to be proven. However, the same state, Florida, has a red flag law to take away guns. What's the difference here? It authorizes a judge to issue a final gun confiscation order that lasts up to a year and can be extended when there is clear and convincing evidence that the respondent poses a significant danger of causing personal injury to himself or herself or others. No psychiatric diagnosis is required. Significant danger is totally undefined. The judge may consider any relevant evidence. I mean, it could be relevant that you were in the military and you fought in war, so obviously you're dangerous, right? Florida judges issue the final risk protection orders 95% of the time. 95% of the time. And it's done without the person being there. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We're going to take a detailed look at what is really involved in these red flag gun laws. We're going to take a look at the moves to confiscate guns in a variety of ways. That's really what the red flag laws are about. They're about confiscation. They want to try to keep you from getting guns as well. And now we have the Republicans talking about that in depth. We have Mitch McConnell and others talking about background checks, talking about an assault weapon ban. You've got Ivanka calling Republicans and Democrats to see what she can get passed. So we're going to talk about all that coming up. Folks, before we do, real quickly, I just want to remind you that we have many products, as we've had this sale, our anniversary sale running, we have many products that are almost out of stock. We still have some of our most popular products deeply discounted, like Brain Force Plus, 50% off Brain Force Plus. My favorite supplement, I've gotten a lot of supplements that I take every morning. Brain Force Plus is my favorite because it really does help me to focus. It helps me with recall, and you can get that right now, 50% off. It doesn't cause you to crash like sugar and coffee and things like that. It really does help you to focus and to recall. I love Brain Force Plus. We also have Ultimate Krill Oil, after being out of stock, is now back in stock and 50% off. Other products that we have are All Natural Sleep Aid Knockout, 50% off. Bod Ease, 50% off. And Turbo Force, 50% off. Many other great products available, 50 to 60% off still at InfoWarsStore.com, but they are almost out of stock. So hurry up before it's too late. We really do need your support. We really do appreciate how you have stood by us in the last year. As we look at these problems coming up, these problems about the attacks against our first speech, our First Amendment, our free speech, free press, the attacks coming up against our ability to defend ourselves, the ability to have firearms as a deterrent to a tyrannical government. That is the most important part of it. It's not even about being able to defend yourself primarily. It is even more important that we be able to have a deterrent, which the people in Hong Kong would dearly love to have. Can you imagine a situation where we have millions of people in Hong Kong and the Chinese government doesn't know how many of them have firearms? You think that they would use the kind of brute force tactics that we expect they're about to use, like they did at Tiananmen Square? No, they wouldn't. They wouldn't do that. And so it is a deterrent, just like having both sides with nuclear weapons during the Cold War was a deterrent to nuclear war. The armed population is a deterrence to tyranny, and it can actually save lives. Doesn't necessarily need to lead to violence. It can be a deterrent to tyrannical movements. But now we have a government that doesn't think that we should have those weapons. It doesn't think that it is like Jeffrey Epstein. It can do whatever it wants, right? There's no controlling legal authority here, said Al Gore once upon a time. Remember that when he was vice president? Well, they don't think there is any controlling legal authority. So let's take a look at this. We have Dan Crenshaw says, like, you hear red flag gun laws, you immediately just turn me off. But you don't hear what I'm saying. I'm saying our red flag gun laws are good. We're going to give you due process. All right, let's take a look at this, because we have 17 different states and the District of Columbia that have enacted red flag gun laws in the wake of the Parkland shooting. How are they working? What is the result of this? And what kind of due process do you have? Let's really take a look at this. 5 states, that would be Connecticut, Florida, Indiana, Rhode Island, Vermont. 5 of the 17 states require that petitions come from police officers or prosecutors. In the other 12 states and the District of Columbia, lots of other potentially aggrieved or well-meaning but mistaken people, such as blood relatives, in-laws, current and former cohabitants, current and former intimates, physicians, mental health specialists, etc., can also file petitions. Oh, but what about Google? Didn't they just SWAT team a whistleblower who released documents? And we'll talk more about those coming up in the program. We'll try to make sure I get through this stuff so we have time for that. But didn't they just call the police and the FBI and say, we're very concerned about his mental wellness? And they swatted him. Google did. And guess what? California has a bill pending that would add to the people who can file a petition to have your guns taken away. It would add employers and coworkers, so Google could have done that. They could have red flagged him if he had any guns. But it can actually be more dangerous just to SWAT team somebody. So when are these ex parte orders allowed? And remember, ex parte means that they do it without you being present. They have a hearing without you being present. Does that sound like due process? Dan Crenshaw? Every state and District of Columbia allows judges to issue gun confiscation orders without giving the respondent a chance to rebut the claims against them. Every one of these 17 states and the District of Columbia does these things ex parte. See, due process is defined by the Constitution, Dan, that you swore to uphold as both a military officer and as a congressman. That says that you will be allowed to be present at the trial. You'll be allowed to confront the witnesses that are there. You'll be able to see the charges against you and answer those charges. You will have counsel, and if you can't afford counsel, it will be provided for you. Those are the types of things that we mean when we say due process, Dan. President Trump. And that's not what's happening with any of these red flag gun laws. 17 states and the District of Columbia, none of them let you have you present there. They're all done ex parte without the person who is the subject of this being present. Do you have a right to legal representation? Now, that's part of the due process, isn't it? I just read that to you. I didn't read it to you, but I just did it from memory. Colorado is the only state that provides counsel to respondents who cannot afford a lawyer or choose not to hire one. Do respondents get a chance to cross-examine their accusers? That's also a part of due process, right? Not necessarily. Do respondents have a civil cause of action against petitioners who lie? No. No state lets petitioners sue their accusers for knowingly misrepresenting facts in the petition to take away their guns as part of red flag laws. And again, besides the issue of this being actual gun confiscation as opposed even to prohibiting people from acquiring guns, it is gun confiscation. The dream of the Democrats, being made possible by turncoat Republicans. Besides that, anybody can tell a lie about you, and you have absolutely no recourse against them. Do respondents have advance notice before the gun confiscation orders are executed? In some states, a respondent never receives notice of anything until the police show up to confiscate his or her firearms, right? And that's why it is so dangerous. It is like SWAT teaming somebody, and we've already had an individual killed that way. Or had an individual killed in Maryland when they showed up to confiscate his guns. He didn't know anything about it. He had been convicted in absentia, ex parte. He didn't know what the charges were. He had no chance to answer those charges. He wasn't able to defend himself. Instead, the police show up at his door. An argument ensued. The police shot and killed him. You know, when we look at this situation in Philadelphia, this is a situation where the police officers are responding to narcotics activity. This is an example of drug prohibition and what it produces. Increased crime. What do you think is going to happen when they prohibit guns? Do you think that gun violence is going to be less or more? Yeah, we stopped all the drugs, drug prohibition. We'll get all the guns with gun prohibition. No, you're going to get a lot more, and a lot more dangerous guns, and a lot more red flag gun laws. Don't worry, we'll do the due process. You know, President Trump said, we got to get the guns, we'll do the due process later. Again, if it's a dangerous person, commit them, lock them up, and go through due process to do it. But it's a much lower standard, as I pointed out. It's done without the person being present. There is no due process. You don't have any recourse against people who just have a personal grudge against you. You can't come after anybody in any of these states that have already enacted it. We've got 17 of the states that have done this. So we've got about a third of the states, plus District of Columbia, have already enacted red flag gun laws, but that's not enough for Ivanka. Ivanka tweeted out in response to Lindsey Graham. Lindsey Graham put out a tweet, read more on red flag extreme risk protection, and Ivanka comes back and says, Congress should enact red flag laws, extreme risk protection orders in every uppercase, all uppercase, every state, and increase resources dedicated to mental health support. So yeah, we need to fund a massive psychiatric bureaucracy because, you know, what could possibly go wrong? Well, we already know what can go wrong. We've already seen what happens with CPS. We have a massive bureaucracy funded by billions of dollars by the federal government to confiscate kids. And we see how anybody, a disgruntled spouse, former spouse, angry family members, angry neighbors can accuse you of child abuse. And it doesn't even have to be an accusation of violence or sex abuse. That's only 15% of the cases, and then even a smaller, very small percentage of those, when they actually go to trial, people are convicted of that. But you can accuse 85% of the time when the kids are taken. There's not even any urgency because there's not any urgency about any accusations of physical or sexual abuse. Anybody can bring those charges. You are guilty, and you must prove that you're innocent. But we've talked about this many times. The parents can't even find out what the charges are against them in most of these cases. The kids get taken. They get put into foster care. They get abused in foster care. The parents have to then get the resources together to try to get their kids back. And that can take quite some time. It can take a year or more for many of these parents, if they have the resources to do it. The same thing is being done here. And we've seen the same thing being done with the war on drugs. Civil asset forfeiture. Take the car, take the home, take the cash, the plane, whatever. The property is charged with a crime. The person who owns the property is not charged with a crime, let alone convicted. That's called due process. We don't do due process. We haven't done due process in quite some time. And when we're talking about civil asset forfeiture as part of the war on drugs, let's understand that the real issue here, we're looking at most of these murders. You know, we look at the situation that happened in Philadelphia yesterday. The police were called there because of narcotics activity. At least 6 police officers were wounded in the shooting. It took place over a very long period of time. That was about drug prohibition. Drug prohibition has not worked for nearly 50 years. It has made drugs more numerous. It has made drugs more concentrated in form. It has created massive gangs of organized crime, shooting it out on the streets. Last time we saw that was when we had alcohol prohibition, and you had the people like Al Capone in Chicago doing the drive-by shootings with fully automatic Tommy guns, standing on the running boards of the Model A's, Model T's, whatever, shooting it out on the street. And then that stopped until we began the war on drugs, and then it started again with a vengeance. And so we get more concentrated forms of what we're trying to prohibit. How do you think it's going to work when we do that with guns? We're going to get more concentrated forms of guns. Why? Because there will be no qualms about what people do with it, just like there wasn't with alcohol, just like there isn't with drugs. Alcohol got more concentrated. Drugs got more concentrated. The people who were putting it together had no concern about product safety at all. And so you're going to get very, very lethal weaponry. and you're going to increase crime. You're going to increase corruption of our government at every level, from the police to law enforcement to the judicial courts. Corruption, because money will be involved. That's what you're going to get when you go into gun prohibition. And to the extent that you do it, you're going to get more of these types of shootouts in Philadelphia. Can you imagine if instead of it being drug activity, if the police had been called out for a red flag confiscation and the person knew about it? And once this happens a few times, we've already had one individual killed who was surprised. He didn't know. It was like being swatted. He got in an argument with the police. They killed him. Well, he wasn't really a threat to anybody, probably, and he didn't know this was happening. What if the person was a real threat? What if they knew this was happening? What if people were innocent and they just had enough and they figured that they were going to be targeted, perhaps killed, just simply because they were gun owners? So you multiply what happened in Philadelphia yesterday by 1,000 or by 1,000,000 or several million when you start coming after gun owners. That's what you're talking about. That's why Eric Swalwell said, well, yeah, we can do that. We can have a civil war. We don't care. That's exactly what they want. They don't want any due process, and they don't offer any due process to people. We look at what's happening in Chicago. Nobody cares about the 47 people shot, 4 fatally, and that really is drug prohibition. That's the example of drug prohibition. And what we see being done now is, they're moving into this forget the due process stuff. And we've done this on so many different levels. Take a look at the FISA court, for example. A secret court. It's ex parte, right? You're tried in absentia. All these types of things that we see happening all the time being brought back. I mean, not only do you not have due process, but we are bringing back the classic abuses of the dark ages and the tactics that our government is proposing to people. You get tried by a secret court. You're not there. You don't even know what the charges are against you. They're already doing that to people to take away their kids and their property. Now they're going to do that to take away your right to defend yourself and to defend your country against a government that becomes too authoritarian as a deterrent. And so we got Ivanka Trump reportedly calling members of Congress to feel out various gun control proposals. Axios reports that Ivanka, quote, has been quietly calling lawmakers since the El Paso and Dayton massacres to gauge their openness to movement on gun legislation when Congress comes back. Reportedly, it includes a conversation with Senator Joe Manchin, preparing to reintroduce the universal background check bill that he and Senator Pat Toomey, a Republican from Pennsylvania, pushed after the Sandy Hook Elementary School attack. Senator Toomey, the co-sponsor of Manchin's gun control bill, indicated he spoke with the president at least 3 times between the August 3 and August 8th shootings. Mitch McConnell also says, so apparently that's not just Ivanka doing this on her own. She's kind of a stalking horse, like Lindsey Graham is. You know, a stalking horse, you know that metaphor? Remember Jeremiah Johnson? How the old guy, Will Greer, was teaching him how to hunt bear. He said, you get the horse between you and the bear, and you walk, with a gun right over the horse's back. And he says, ain't the bear going to see my legs? He goes, a bear doesn't know how many legs a horse has. Do you know how many legs gun control has? Do you know who's behind this? Do you know who's behind the stalking horse? Well, President Trump has talked to Senator Toomey to perhaps at least 3 times since these shootings, wants to get something done. Mitch McConnell is open to universal background checks, he said. That would lead the discussion when the Senate reconvenes. McConnell also said that an assault weapons ban would be, quote, front and center. Front and center. Yeah. This is Republicans we're talking about here. I tweeted out a couple of weeks ago, I said, Republicans are far more statist, far more to the left than the Democrats were when I was growing up. And the Democrats are to the left of Marx and Stalin. That's the sad reality of where we are today. You better hang on to your guns. You're going to need them. Yeah. Congress should enact red flag laws in every state, says Ivanka. Yeah, there's no evidence that they reduce any violence. They do violate due process, as I pointed out. Oh, by the way, they don't have the authority to do this either. Congress doesn't have the authority. They're prohibited from infringing on our ability to own military weapons. Come and take them. Come and take the cannons, they said at Concord, Lexington, and Goliad. We'll be right back.
The definition of constitutional carry is not needing any form of permission from any government to exercise your natural-born right to defend yourself. More specifically, your natural-born right to be able to carry a gun to defend your loved ones, your family, even yourself. Like I said before, this is a little bit controversial, but I don't think it's controversial at all. I personally don't think that we should need a permission slip or a permission card or a little piece of paper that says we can exercise any of our constitutional rights, right? I don't think I should have to have a little card that allows me to speak freely or to talk about my government in ways that I don't agree with them, aka the First Amendment. I don't think I should have to have a card that says that, hey, look, according to this permission slip from the government, it is illegal for you to search my premises without a warrant. Those are two perfect examples that just goes to show that the Second Amendment is the only constitutional amendment that for some reason has been kind of harangued into this place where the citizens like us have to get permission from a state government to just carry a weapon. I think that's insane.
He's absolutely right. That's Tactical Tim from USCCA, U.S. Constitutional Carry Association. He's absolutely right. Look, if you've got to have a permission slip from the government to speak, or you got to have a permission slip from the government to own a gun, it is no longer a God-given right. It is a government-granted privilege. It is a license. No. Not going to accept that. And, of course, there isn't going to be any due process, and there isn't going to be any privacy for anyone. It's a very dangerous path that we're going down. So let's talk about the unconstitutional gun laws and the path that the Republican Party is taking right now. Because we already know the Democrats are completely off the rails. No discussion. And there's no point in getting them back, but you better hope that you can get the Republicans back if you put pressure on them. And if you step back and say, well, I don't care because it's President Trump. He's got a plan. Trust the plan. Don't criticize President Trump. He's playing 4D chess. If you don't say anything about this, he is going to be influenced by people like Ivanka, by Lindsey Graham, by other turncoats like that. Whether he wants this or not, whether he understands this or not, you better get on board and you better start paddling on the right side because they're paddling on the left side of the canoe. Democrats are pushing more gun control after Mitch McConnell caves on background checks, reports Breitbart. Democrat lawmakers are already looking beyond universal background checks, hoping to pressure Mitch McConnell into banning assault weapons, too. And, of course, he said assault weapons. He said to The Hill, he said they're front and center when we come back. Front and center. As I said before, I'm very concerned that all this loose talk about take the guns, do the due process later, and then you got other people coming back, oh, no. Our bill, our red flag laws, they have due process and so forth. It may be 3 steps forward and 1 step back. They may go in and they may say, look, we're going to do red flag laws. We're going to do background checks, universal background checks. We're going to do assault weapon bans, and then come back and say, never mind, we won't do one of those. Aren't you glad? Aren't you happy? Aren't you grateful about what faithful servants of the Constitution we are here in the Republican Party? Let me tell you something. If they do universal background checks, and that seems to be a given for sure. This being talked about by Trump, by McConnell, by Lindsey Graham. AWR Hawkins at Breitbart says universal background checks are unenforceable without having a full gun registration of every gun owner. He said once such checks are in place, it is only a matter of time before lawmakers in one party or the other suggest a loose registration scheme. In other words, this isn't working because we've got to have registration. We can't do a background check if we don't know who's got these guns. Look, I saw the same thing happen with the UN's Armed Trade Treaty. The UN Armed Trade Treaty. And again, that was set up. Even the New York Times admitted that the Fast and Furious thing was a false flag to create demand for this. The UN wants to abolish the possession of any firearms by any population anywhere, especially in the United States. And so the UN was proposing this arms trade treaty. And during the Bush and Obama administration, they had the gun walking program. And the ATF was involved in a false flag operation. They would take guns and transport them into Mexico as part of the war on drugs stuff, right? The drug prohibition. It's not a war on drugs. It's a war of drugs against the American people. But as part of that prohibition scheme, and to make guns look bad, you had the ATF and members of that participating in a false flag operation, buying guns in America, taking them into Mexico, and then saying, oh, looky here, look at what we found. Oh, we're going to have to control this because we got small arms going across an international border here. Now, of course, it's not really a border. They don't care, right? They don't care about that. But they care if guns cross the border. They don't care if people cross the border. And then it all blew up in their face when you had an agent get killed as part of Fast and Furious. But gun walking had been going on all the way back into the Bush administration. This is a bipartisan issue, and we're seeing this coming back now with a vengeance. People like Mitch McConnell, people like Lindsey Graham. And so it blew up in their face, and they didn't get it. But a key part of that, and why they wanted to push that so hard, and I said it at the time I was fighting it, it was before I came here to InfoWars. I was doing videos and presentations with a gun group about this. Actually, we went to the UN when they were having the vote. Took pictures there with the twisted barrel gun that they've got and so forth. They hate guns at the UN. Why? Because power comes out of the barrel of a gun, and they want to be the only ones who possess any power. They don't want to balance the power between the people and the governments. And it was necessary for them, if they were going to stop the flow of arms going across borders, it was going to be necessary for them to take registration into the United States. They were going to have to know who owned all the guns and who owned all the ammunition. And so they were going to have to register and track everything, and they were going to have to take that registration and tracking back into the United States. Now Mitch McConnell and these other people, even after it failed under the Bush and Obama administrations, they're back with universal background checks, and AWR Hawkins is exactly right. This is about universal registration of gun owners and their guns, but also of gun owners primarily. A universal system means that every gun, every piece of ammunition, every gun owner is going to be registered with the government. Because right now the government doesn't know where most of these guns are. And this has already happened in California, as he points out, in the early 1990s. The state now has a firearm registration requirement. After they put in universal background checks, they now have a registration requirement. And they also have a confiscation law. This is where this is going. And when we look at what is being done, we have Kamala Harris coming out, immediately trying to capitalize on this shooting in Philadelphia. You had 6 police officers shot in Philadelphia. Why? Drug prohibition. You had 47, this last weekend, 47 people shot in Chicago. Why? Drug prohibition. You had 4 people killed in Chicago. Why? Drug prohibition. Oh, let's do gun prohibition then. That'll work out really well. And that's exactly what Kamala Harris did. She went on with Wolf Blitzer. Where else but CNN, right? And Wolf Blitzer says, well, you're a former Attorney General of California. And, he's talking about drug dealers and so forth. She immediately does a pivot, just like Chris Christie did when he was talking about drug prohibition. Remember, Chris Christie gave his wrenching tale about the life of a guy that he knew in college whose life was destroyed when he got hooked on opioids because of a back injury. And then Chris Christie does a complete non sequitur pivot to medical marijuana. It's like, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? And she did the exact same thing. Well, you're a former Attorney General and you had to deal with drug dealers. What do you say about this? Because that's what this raid was. It was about drug dealers. She immediately pivots and goes to gun dealers. Listen to this. When will it stop, right? She says. Part of my focus on what we need to do around smart gun safety laws is to recognize that we have to have more enforcement around gun dealers. So she goes from drug dealers to gun dealers, just like Chris Christie went from opioids to marijuana. And we're going to have the same kind of blowback and corruption and violence, escalation of the violence there if we go to gun prohibition. You got Pete Buttigieg in his town, South Bend. There's been a 40% spike in people being hit by gunshots compared to 2018. Why would that be? They haven't had a mass shooting by some crazy person. No, it is drug prohibition. You know, we hear after all of these different things, we look at people's, what motivated them, and people say, well, look, they've seen all this stuff portrayed over and over again by Hollywood and videos and movies. They've played video games and so forth. Do you ever hear any of these people say? Maybe it's because of the violence that they see going on in their actual life because of the drug prohibition situation in their neighborhoods. You think that might be an influence that's even more influencing than video games or even Hollywood movies, to see the actual gun fire and shootouts being conducted by these drug gangs in your own neighborhood? It breeds violence, but of course they'll never say that because that points the finger right back to the government. That's it for today's broadcast. Thanks for listening.